a recording for the meeting. Please do let me know if you have any issues with being recorded. We do this just so that we can build out a summary that will be posted to the website following the discussion. Before we jump into it, I want to go ahead and hand it over to Carlos Diaz. Carlos is the Deputy Director of Engineering with Sonoma Water, and he's going to provide some opening remarks before we get started. Carlos.
Thank you, Sam. Wanted to welcome our stakeholder committee to our second meeting here on the heels of our first meeting, kickoff meeting back in October. Really just want to thank you all for your participation in the overall effort, your time. I know is very important to you, and we really appreciate your commitment to this overall process and your input and feedback as well. This afternoon, we have an agenda set up to discuss not only the enhanced compliance action. Stu will be giving an overall presentation of that. As you all know, the enhanced compliance action resulted as a settlement with the North Coast Regional Water Quality Control Board over some uncontrolled spills, sanitary sewer overflows within the Russian River County Sanitation District's collection system. On the heels of the 2017 floods and also the February 2019 floods. Stu will be giving an overview of the ECA, which I'm sure you all are well aware of what that is, but just as a reminder what it is, what it's not, where we are in the process and where we'll be going. There are some very specific goals and objectives that were lined out for the enhanced compliance action. Really focused on identifying regional wastewater treatment alternatives for West Sonoma County. As we all know, Western Sonoma County is challenged in many ways with respect to wastewater collection, treatment, disposal, particularly due to small customer bases and the rural nature and geography of the county. So primary objective is really finding those regional alternatives. Stu will dive into that. This is separate from some other ongoing studies related to OTS and the future of those OTS and what solutions may exist for Monte Rio and Villa Grande. But certainly we are proceeding with all of those other studies in mind, including Occidental Pipeline to Grayton. Looking forward to identifying really what that potential is for West County, what the best regional solution may be, and understanding not only the technical feasibility, but really side by side with that technical feasibility, it's really critical for us to have this stakeholder committee's input into identifying what those solutions may look like. In the future, having the community buy-in, obviously, absolutely critical to the success of any future alternative. On the heels of Stu's discussion of the enhanced compliance action, we have Catherine Geese with Wes Yost, and she will be stepping through several of the wastewater regionalization alternatives and different scenarios that have been looked at up until now, along with kind of scoring criteria that have been used to assess each of those alternatives, and really important for us to hear from all of you and get your feedback on those alternatives and scenarios that Catherine will be presenting. And Sam, I appreciate you facilitating the meeting overall and help guiding our conversation so that we can make sure to capture everybody's input and questions. With that, I'll go ahead and hand this back off. We thank you all for being here.
Wonderful. Thanks, Carlos. Carlos did a great job of summing up the agenda already. I'm curious, it'd be great to get a show of hands for who among you joined us for the first meeting back on October 22nd. You can find the little hand raise feature in the reactions button on your Zoom control. And it'd be wonderful just to get a little head count of who was able to join us or thumbs up. That's great. All right, seeing a few thumbs, few hands. We've got a bunch of new folks on as well, so that's great. Throughout the discussion today, as Carlos mentioned, there's really two presentations that you're going to hear. First from Parastu, providing an overview of the ECA itself, and importantly, what the ECA is and is not. I know that with any complex planning process like this, there's always some misconceptions out there about what's actually being covered in this study versus many of the other efforts that are happening in the West County right now. So Parastu will walk you through that. And then after that, as Carlos mentioned, Catherine's going to talk about some of the initial draft study regionalization alternatives. For both of those presentations, I welcome and encourage folks to jump in with any questions. Just because we have a pretty good turnout today, I would ask that you use the hand raise feature. And again, you can find that by clicking on the reactions button on your Zoom controls and then raise hand. That'll just help us keep track of the conversation queue. So really hoping that during those presentations, you limit your questions to sort of clarifying questions or things that you weren't quite sure about. Item number 5 here, that's where we're really going to break for stakeholder committee responses to the initial alternatives. We're a small enough group that I welcome everybody to participate in that. I'll display some guiding questions on the screen to hopefully generate some ideas for all of you. And we'll go through the same process. Use the little hand raise function, and then we'll jump right into it. And then finally, the last item that we have on the docket, also under item number 5, we're going to do a simple poll to see which one of the alternatives that's presented kind of resonates with you the most today. This is going to be really helpful for the engineering team to continue to refine things as the process moves forward, as we move through the process. So that's kind of what we have on tap for you. Our goal is to get you out of here on time or before 6 p.m. Before we do that, though, it'd be great to hear a little bit about where you're all coming from. So I'll read through the list, and if you wouldn't mind introducing yourself, that would be wonderful. So I'll read your name off. Starting at the top of my list, I have Chad Davison.
Hey, everybody. My name's Chad Davison, and I'm currently managing both Grayton and Forestville Water District and Grayton Community Services District. So we are excited about this initiative because we're two big stakeholders in what happens with the future of West County's wastewater management systems.
Wonderful. Thank you. Steve Trippy.
I'm Steve Trippy. I am, among other things, along with Dan Fine, co-chair of the Lower Russian River Wastewater Citizens Advisory Group that's looking at another study that's here. I also am today trying to keep the river out of my house, which is a different kind of challenge that some of us experience out here, but happy to be.
Thanks so much for joining, Steve. And obviously that takes huge precedent over this this discussion of the study, but I hope things go as smoothly as possible.
No, there's nothing we can do, right?
Yeah. And Nathan Corliss.
Good evening, everybody, or good afternoon. So Nathan Quarles with Permit Sonoma, County of Sonoma, the permitting glorified building department. So we do a lot of permitting for septic systems. It's most on topic for this forum, but also building permits, well permits, grading permits, general interest in West County solutions.
Thanks, Nathan. Alexis for Berkmos.
Hi, I'm Alexis for Berkmos, and I'm a resident of the Lower River, sort of right outside of Monterey, and unfortunately, literally on the other side of the study area that's being done in the Monterey Villa Grande. And so very interested in how improvements in the region could also scoop up other homeowners that aren't in that study area. And, you know, it's also sometimes a cash-strapped area. And so finding ways to help us all accomplish safe sewage.
Thanks, Alex. And we'll go through a series of project maps that outline all of the areas you're talking about. So we'll certainly keep your comments in mind. Brenda Edelman. Yes, Brenda.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, I've been working on wastewater issues in the West County since 1978, a long time. I was around when the Russian River County Sanitation District was built. I'm head of a group called Russian River Watershed Protection Committee. I'm also on the Montero Villa Grande CAG. And I've studied the situation of wastewater in West County all that time. So I'm hopeful I can add my knowledge to your process.
Wonderful. Thanks so much, Brenda. Next, we'll go to Dan Fain.
Hey, I don't have to keep this off. I'm the co-chair with Steve Trippi of the Monterey Lower Russian River CAG. And I've been working on wastewater problems here for probably about 25 years too. And like Steve, I'm right on the edge of the river here and hoping it stays where it is. And I also note that there are 4 CAG members in this group, so we're reasonably well represented here, and a lot of the work is being focused on this little corner of the watershed. And our hope is to begin modeling the process of making these changes.
Thanks, Dan. Kyla Brooke.
Hi, I'm Kyla Brooke. I'm also a member of the CAG. I've been working on wastewater issues since 2004-ish. I am a realtor and I spend a lot of time out in the field looking at systems that are either failed or about to fail or need creative solutions. I am a landlord and I own multi-units, and I feel that underrepresented in many discussions is how to handle multi-units and what costs are going to be and how people handle wastewater. I find that it's an under-discussed topic, and the river is quite high.
All right. Thank you. I know there's more rain coming very soon here, so I hope you all stay dry out there. Let's go next to Tina Lowe.
Hi, everyone. My name is Tina Lowe. I'm an engineer with the North Coast Water Board. And my focus is on permitting and planning of recycled water projects with an interest in climate resilience and general water supply planning. And I work closely with the folks involved in the enhanced compliance action.
Thanks, Tina.
Thank you.
Matt.
Hi, can you hear me okay?
Yes, thank you.
Sorry. My name is Matt McDermott. I am the current chairman of the board for the Forestville Water District.
Wonderful. Thanks. All right. I know there's a number of members of the public and folks who didn't attend the first meeting, so I'll just run through that list real quickly. We'll start with Sharon Piper. Care to introduce yourself?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, I'm a resident in Forestville, and my daughter's a resident in Grayton, and she is not happy with the quality of her water, just the color that stains everything. But ultimately, I'm just here as a resident to listen to what you have to say.
Thanks so much for joining.
You're welcome.
Joseph McIntyre.
Good afternoon, friends and neighbors. I am Joseph McIntyre. I'm from Grayton. I'm a member of the Grayton Community Services District Board, and very interested in seeing how we can think about solving the problems of wastewater collectively for all of the communities of the West County.
Great, thanks so much. George Lincoln.
George Lincoln. I am an operations engineer with Sonoma Water. I've been involved with wastewater treatment for several decades, and and specifically the Russian River County Sanitation District for at least the last 10.
Thanks, George. Ken Sked, or Skeed, my apologies. Right. And go ahead. All right, we'll come back to Ken. Please do jump in if you have a chance. Catherine Brown. Right. No pressure if you don't want to introduce yourself. Steve Koldis.
Yep, I'm Steve Koldis. I work for Sonoma Water in the design section, and I'm working with Brelgy and Race on the feasibility study at Monterey and Villagreen.
Thanks so much, Steve. All right, and a few of our other project staff, Andrea Rodriguez.
Andrea Rodriguez, Sonoma Water Communications.
Ann Dubé.
Hi, Ann Dubé. Nice to see you all. And I work with Andrea on communications.
Catherine Geese.
Hello, I'm Catherine Geese. I'm with West Jost Associates, and we have been working with Sonoma Water on the evaluation.
Great, thanks so much. All right, my apologies if I missed anyone. If I did, please, by all means, introduce yourself via the chat. At this point, I would like to go ahead and hand it over to Parastu Hushel-Desat. Parastu is going to walk you through a discussion of the ECA. Parastu.
Thank you, Sam. If we could advance the next slide. Today I am going to present an overview of the Enhanced Compliance Action, or ECA. We briefly talked about it in our previous meeting in October, but I would like to make more clarifications. So on December 13th, 2023, the North Coast Regional Water Quality Control Board adopted settlement agreement and a stipulation for entry of order number R1-2023-0049. The order outlined the penalties, as Carlos mentioned, for the 3 sewer overflows violations that happened in 2017 and 2019 floods. So the violation resulted in discretionary penalties totaling more than $1,033,000 in administrative civil liability. The district made a check payment of about $147,000 to the State Water Resources Control Board cleanup and abatement account. The remaining $886,000 in liability was suspended upon the completion of an enhancement compliance action, or ECA, for the West County Water Quality and Recycled Water Supply Feasibility Project with a stakeholder committee, which is basically our project and what we are doing. So I really encourage everyone to watch the board meeting, since it would help to better understand why the district couldn't use any of the funds to improve the existing sewer system. Next slide, please.
Parastu, before that, I do apologize. I missed DK in the introductions. D, would you like to introduce yourself? And again, no pressure if you prefer not to. Okay. Great.
Okay, so the ECA consists of a high-level feasibility study for the West County sewer system, which is coupled with this stakeholder program to address wastewater challenges in the West County region. The scope of feasibility study includes 4 main topics. Assess the feasibility and benefits of multiple potential regionalization options that Catherine is going to talk about them later in the presentation. evaluate the potentials for regional projects to serve a small, rural, and potentially disadvantaged communities. That's going to come up in our future webinars or meetings. And then the third one is assess the amount of recycled water that could be available for reuse through wastewater and or recycled water regionalization. And then the last one is to evaluate the benefits of regionalization on climate adaptation and resiliency. If we can go to the next slide. So the ECA has a specific milestones and deliverables, which are explained actually in detail on the website. So we had our first meeting in October when we introduced the project and talked about the committee charter. This is our second meeting focusing on initial regionalization alternatives. And we have scheduled 3 more meetings in May, August, and November to share the findings of the technical feasibility study that WestEOST is preparing with the stakeholder committee. The main technical deliverable to the North Coast Regional Water Quality Control Board is a feasibility study report, which our consultant WestEOST will prepare, and will include everything presented to this committee. So basically, what you hear from the meeting that we had in October all the way to the meetings that we have in November, it's going to be included in that report. So the draft should be ready in November of 2025. We submit that to the regional board, and then it must be finalized by May 2026. The other deliverable to the board is the project advancement report that needs to be prepared by the stakeholder committee. So once the technical feasibility study is complete, so the stakeholder committee will, look at those regionalization options, identify feasible options that have board support and or support from existing wastewater systems that are going to accept the wastewater flows, and then develop recommendation for advancement of those regionalization options. And it will also consider a variety of funding sources to pay for any feasible projects. So the draft for that should be ready basically right after we have the feasibility study finalized in May 2026. It must be completed in October 2026. I am going to pause here. I don't have any more talking points, but before I hand it back to Sam, I am happy to answer any questions.
People are gathering their thoughts first too. Question for you, I guess. Is the ECA and the corresponding feasibility study, is it expected to be an actual engineering design that will get down to that level of specificity that it can sort of be picked up and implemented immediately, or is it sort of a step before that?
No, it's a sort of a step before that. It's looking at the option or different options that could solve the problem. And once we have that option laid out, and Catherine is going to talk about that, then we probably need another consultant or another design firm to go ahead and finish that design. At this point, we are not doing any detailed design.
Mm-hmm. Will there be environmental review associated with the feasibility study?
Environmental review for the project that is going to be selected as the final alternative or preferred alternative, that's going to happen with that project. ECA or this feasibility study doesn't include any environmental impact report or any CEQA document.
Wonderful. Thank you for that clarification. All right, so before we start taking a closer look at the actual alternatives that have been developed to date, I want to go ahead and pause for any clarifying questions that either members of the committee or members of the public may have. Alexis, please.
Hi. Whatever is chosen, is that actually going to happen? Or is it simply a recommendation and then it's about seeing if it can get next steps, get funded, etc.?
Exactly. I mean, these are only recommendations, and for the projects to happen, we need to have some sort of funding to move that project ahead. There is no governance study at this point for this different alternatives, so that's going to be the next step.
Thank you for that. Brenda.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, thank you.
I wasn't sure of all the things I had to touch here to make it work. Okay.
Agreed.
The Russian River County Sanitation District is about 40 years old now. And there are many aspects to it, especially the collection system, that are in need of very important improvements. There have been, I just have one example here that there have been, since 2013, there have been 15 illegal Category 1 spills that amounted to 2,482,304 gallons. Certain parts of the system that are most at risk have been studied in detail by West Yost, and there are documents on that in great detail. What I've been concerned about is when there are discussions about adding other communities to this system, I feel deeply that it needs to be, the issues that are a big problem need to be addressed. And in the event that Monterey and Villa Grande should want to hook up, the place where they'd probably have to hook up is just about the weakest part with the most failures of our system. And my concern has been about getting the system repaired. The estimate is $45 million. The county or the water agency was trying to get funding to do the most important parts of it. And that money didn't come through, and it won't for at least a year. So what I'm concerned about is that decisions will be made about hooking up various communities before we know if the needed work is going to be done. And I'll leave it there. There are more details, but it's kind of a very serious problem. Oh, and the spills occur mainly during events like we're having right now, is during flooding events.
Thank you for that, Brenda. And hopefully when we take a look at some of the alternatives, that'll explain some of the current thinking a little bit more, but I want to make sure that we circle back around to you and get your feedback on some of the alternatives that the team is thinking.
Thank you.
Sure. Any other questions for Paristu before we keep moving? All right. Well, thank you for that overview. For those that attended the first meeting back in October, one of the specific requests was sharing the actual text of the ECA itself, and then again, sort of explaining what the ECA is and what the ECA isn't. So really appreciate that presentation. I think folks are going to be very interested in hearing what the actual alternatives are starting to look like, though. So I'd like to go ahead and hand it over to Catherine from West Yost.
Great, thank you very much. Go ahead, Ed. So I'm gonna start off just giving an overview of what our scope of work is, so that all folks are kind of all on the same page here. So the first part of the work is really focused on the existing wastewater infrastructure. So that includes Russian River, CSD, the Grayton Community Services District, Forestville, and the Occidental Sanitary District. And what we've done initially was to assess those facilities in terms of their current limitations, capacities, some of the issues that were just talked about, and try to identify and evaluate what is needed at each of those sites to effectively continue functioning as a wastewater treatment plant. And then the next step then is to look at strategies for regionalizing wastewater treatment, whether it's using some of these existing infrastructure or other solutions that we'll get into in a minute. But the idea is regionalizing wastewater treatment first focused on the existing communities that are already sewered. Once we pick a preferred regionalization strategy, then we'll start diving into ways and costs and level of effort needed to bring in other unsewered communities. That includes the Monterey area, but then as well as other clusters of communities that are out there that are currently not sewered. And then we build on that concept then by start looking at, once we know how much potential wastewater would be treated with both the sewered and the unsewered communities, we can look at, for that preferred solution, how much recycled water are we generating? What are the recycled water opportunities given that water supply? And then also, how does this proposed project, this grand vision, increase and improve resiliency to climate change factors? And so right now we are at the developing the alternatives phase. So next slide. So we looked at 8 different scenarios, and they really can be grouped into 3 different categories. The first category I refer to as local facility scenarios. So those scenarios involve keeping wastewater treatment in West County, focusing on the facilities that exist there and building off of those. The next category are the export scenarios. So that's looking at exporting all wastewater to a larger, more facility that's outside of the West County area. And then the third category are what we call the combination scenarios, keeping some of it local and then exporting other parts of the wastewater flow. Next slide. So for the local scenarios, as mentioned on the previous slide, there's really 3 different alternatives. So one is 2 separate regional, what we call hubs. One that is at the Russian River treatment plant site that would incorporate Monterey, and potentially other unsewered communities that are near the Russian River plant. The second hub would be at the Forestville Grayton Community Services District. Those 2 facilities, Forestville and Grayton, are already connected by one pipeline. They share recycled water resources. And so the concept would be to build upon that partnership and to leverage the existing infrastructure that's at those 2 plants to come up with the most optimized regional hub there. I'll also note that there's already a project that is in the works, moving into design to connect the Occidental facility to the Grayton facility. So the assumption for our analysis is that that project will move forward and would be part of this future Forestville Grayton hub. So that's alternative 1A. Alternative 1B would be to create one regional facility at the Russian River treatment plant site, build that facility out and deal with that. And then the third alternative for local is having one regional facility at that Forestville Grayton hub and providing all wastewater treatment plant between those 2 facilities and basically add a new more advanced treatment plant that would be located at that site.
Okay. That's gone.
Kyla.
Oh.
And I guess
I'm sorry, that was an inadvertent, that was
No problem.
inadvertent. I thought that I was muted. My apologies.
No problem at all. Thank you.
Well, but that's actually a good pause just to say if folks do have any questions about what I'm saying and you want to stop me and ask while we're in the moment, it's not a problem at all.
Great. Hand up from Steve Trippy. Steve?
I would just note that the Monterey Villa Grande study area is an arbitrary area that was driven by funding availability based on zip code. And there's many, I believe a couple of people on this call said, I'm right next door to the study area. And there are other areas that are on the way to the Guerneville plant from here. So I would not limit your investigation to what's being studied in this study area, but where the unsewered properties are.
Yeah, thank you for making that comment. Yeah, we are not limiting it to that. I would say that the way we're handling the Monterey study area a little separately from the other unsewered communities, in that because you guys already did that study, you've clearly defined what the flows and loads are from that area. We have like sort of a known quantity of connections and flows and loads there. So because of that, we don't have to do that extra work to define that. So we're able to already, as part of this initial step where we're really focused on the knowns, to kind of bring in the Monterey flows and loads. As I mentioned in the earlier slide, once we pick a regional solution, we actually have all this data from Sonoma County on all of the unsewered homes throughout West County. And we're going to be looking at those and prioritizing those for connection into this regional concept. But Monterey is kind of already in there, again, because you guys had stepped ahead and already had that information, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I'm just saying that there are communities that we're very conscious that have been left out for qualifying for the loan. For instance, Northwood, on the way to the Russian River, but not in the study.
Right. We understand that.
Okay.
Alexis?
Quick question, just practicality wise, in the case of fire, are these type of facilities easy to get running if they quote unquote burn down? I.e., is there a fire reason why, as we think about these things you're presenting, we would want more than one, to have duplicate ways to provide, versus if it's all in one basket and it burns, then we're in deep trouble?
That's a good point. The way we are assessing the alternatives, one of the factors is resiliency to things like fire. And so yes, options that provide more resiliency might rank higher and would be a potentially more preferred option. So yeah, we are accounting for things like that when we think about what's the best approach here.
For the question. Why don't we go ahead and keep moving now? We can certainly come back to questions, but I know you're going to get to those criteria in just a few minutes here.
No problem. Okay, so the export scenarios, here we also have 3 different alternatives. One would be to combine all of the flow and pump it over to the Windsor wastewater treatment plant. The second would be to combine all the flow and pump it to the Santa Rosa treatment plant. And the third is sort of a split where we would look at, basically taking Monterey, Russian River, and other communities that are north of the river and along that alignment to Windsor, and then bringing Grayton, Forestville, Occidental, and other communities in that area to the Russian River plant. So kind of splitting that, the flow to 2 different locations. Next slide. And then the combination scenarios are sort of a hodgepodge of what you just saw. So 3A would be having a local facility at Russian River that would accommodate agencies in that area, while all of the wastewater from the Forestville, Grayton, Occidental, and surrounding communities would go to Santa Rosa. And then 3B is just the opposite of that, exporting from the Russian River, Monte Rio, and north of the river out to Windsor, and then having some local wastewater treatment at the Grayton Forestville site. So we looked at a range of factors when we evaluated and completed this initial screening. So capital costs, we did not develop very detailed cost estimates. We looked at it more in the extent of, you know, what are the needed treatment facility improvements? How much length of pipeline do we need? How much recycled water conveyance would be required, and looked at it more in terms of quantities as opposed to a very detailed cost estimate. That detailed cost estimating is happening in the next phase, which we're just working on now. So the idea was to screen alternatives, get it down to the top 4, and then evaluate those in more detail. So right now, capital cost was evaluated in sort of a quasi-quantitative way. And then the other factors we looked at was reliability and ease of operation. And so these were specific to, say, like meeting water quality objectives. Is it going to be simple to operate and maintain the type of treatment that's needed? How complex is the system? Are there complex issues that would need to be resolved for that particular alternative? The third would be having that flexibility for adding unsewered communities. So particularly some of the communities of interest that were identified, you know, would there be, for example, a pipeline alignment that would go very close to where those facilities are, making connection to them easier and more viable than maybe other alternatives. The fourth is recycled water opportunities. So this is more about, you know, are there users in the area of that facility? Like, does it create recycled water opportunity, both locally, specific to like recycled water within West County? So for example, if we exported everything to Windsor, there may not be a lot of local water recycling opportunities. Environmental is kind of just what you would think, looking at floodplains, wetlands, endangered species, energy efficiency, truck traffic, all the kind of factors that would play into an environmental analysis. Then resiliency, and I should have fire on here, indicates flooding, climate change, seismic. You know, what is the alternative more susceptible to factors that could, you know, result in a major problem? And then ease of implementation. This gets into both constructability issues as well as, say, governance issues. You know, would it be, you know, do we have to develop a whole new governance structure, and, you know, the complexity associated with that. So with the next slide. So we took all of these criteria and evaluated them, and we looked at them, you know, across different weightings to come up with this analysis. And if you just go ahead to the next slide, we were able to filter out to the top 4 options. And so those are the 2 separate regional facilities, with the Monte Rio, Russian River at one and Forestville, Grayton at the other. And frankly, one of the reasons that ranked so high was because you already have so much existing infrastructure at those facilities. So from a cost perspective, it seems promising. But that part of that, kind of alluding to some of the comments earlier, really depends on what it's going to take to get those facilities to where they can, you know, meet requirements long term, because we are not just ignoring regulatory requirements or upgrade and condition related improvements. That is all incorporated into the work we're doing. The second was the one regional facility at the Forestville Grayton plant. That also ranked very high. That would be a brand new treatment plant designed to meet all the criteria for discharge to the river. So it had a lot of benefits from that perspective. Exporting to Windsor, which is the yellow block, that was also very highly ranked. And then the fourth was exporting to Santa Rosa, which was a little bit lower in ranking, but still what made the cut for our top 4 alternatives to evaluate. So next slide. So now we're going to really get into the true cost of everything. So we're laying out treatment facilities and conveyance pipelines and all of the infrastructure needed for each alternative. And then we're going to develop planning level life cycle cost estimates. So both capital cost and operating cost over the project lifetime. And then at the next technical advisory meeting, which is our small technical group that's working on this, we are going to, based on that work, as well as the qualitative ranking, select the preferred alternative. And then once we have selected that preferred alternative, we will bring in now the analysis of what the cost would be to also serve the unsewered parcels. And we'll develop and identify what that cost is above just this regionalization cost. And then we will look at, once we know all the flow that would be coming into this regional solution, both from sewered and unsewered, then we can say, this is how much recycled water supply we have. And this is then what the recycled water options would be and how that recycled water system would look. And then we'll also address, just assess and define, how this particular regional solution improves the resiliency within the region to climate change issues such as drought, flooding, as well as fires, which is also a climate change impact.
Thanks for that. All right, so we'll pause for, again, some clarifying questions and then move right into our discussion. I do see one hand up from Brenda. Go ahead, Brenda.
Okay, can you hear me all right?
Yep. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm just wondering if some of the things you'll consider in evaluation are things like history of failure, whether they're close to the Russian River or not, what kinds of environmental factors might present more need for more expensive analysis. For instance, there's a liquefaction problem in the Russian River that when they were building the system, they had a lot of problems dealing with that. And there's still concerns around it. And there's a lot more. I will eventually get to all of them, but just throw those in the mix for right now.
Yeah, all of the factors you mentioned have been identified as things that we need to consider. And I think part of, these meetings is to, get that kind of input about what are the factors that should be considered.
It just seems like Russian River County Sanitation District almost comes up more than anything else on your selection list. And I just want to make sure that all of the factors that create problems, I mean, the funding for this project comes from a penalty against Russian River for having, I don't know how many spills they've had. I've been studying that. There's been an enormous number of spills, but the amount of spillage they've had is 5 times greater than all other dischargers into the river put together. And that's something you need to consider, I believe, when you come up with your criteria for selection.
Great. Yeah, I think that is part of the analysis, but I appreciate that input for sure.
Well, I hope so.
Brenda, I would just add that, that the existing problems exist primarily within the collection system, gravity sewer collection system, and the lift stations. Any option for potential regionalization would not necessarily rely on that existing collection system that is capacity limited. I fully understand the concerns, but there could be potential to connect, for example, directly to the wastewater treatment plant. So just wanted to highlight that. Don't want to lose sight of that possibility.
Well, I just want to emphasize there's a liquefaction problem. So even if you built another pipeline and didn't send it through the current pipeline, eventually that would be a problem too.
We would
Wouldn't
certainly
have
share
the
it with those
same
considerations in
longevity
mind.
as other systems would have.
Thanks for that. I see several hands up right now. Let me go to Joseph McIntyre, followed by Steve Trippy, and then Sharon Piper. Joseph?
Thank you so much, Catherine. Two clarifying questions. First of all, can you just tell us a little bit more about the methodology by which these were scored? Was this something that was done by the technical committee? Explain us a little bit when we look at this chart, what exactly we're seeing and what you've taken into consideration.
Yeah, it's fairly complex, but you know, we ranked each factor that was shown on the previous slide, basically from 1 to 5, in terms of, you know, all the different things and relative to each other, right?
Right.
So, you know, resiliency, for example, that's a good one. That's, you know, the subjects come up a lot, you know, so alternatives at the Russian River plant, given some of the resiliency issues, proximity to the river, the liquefaction issues, ranked fairly low on that compared to some of the options that didn't have that potential. And then within, so we ranked each one relative to each other, like I said. And then what you see on the graph there is on the next chart, on the next slide. Yep, it was, we then did a Monte Carlo analysis to say, okay, if this factor, like if the weighting of each factor were modified, would, you know, how does that rank? How does that change the ranking? So we then applied that analysis to try to see if there would be, you know, large distribution or not of the various alternatives. And that's effectively how we got to this graph. And then
Okay, and so
from there, yeah.
Just to be clear, if we've got larger whisker bars here, it means that if you change any one of the parameters weightings, it would have a bigger impact on what that particular result would be. So for example, if you looked at the, I guess that's the one in gray, 1C, that's got smaller bars. So it's relatively less permeable to the different, okay, I just want to understand that. And,
yep, that's exactly right.
And that's pretty important because that's essentially the risk factor that goes into any one of these. And so we'd be asking big questions around risk. The second question I just want to see was about a criteria. It has to do with the, not so much the capital cost or the benefits, all of which are clear that you've really looked at, but the actual economic costs to the ratepayers of the different systems, right? So one of the things in Grayton, of course, we have quite a high connection fee. Our friends in Occidental, of course, have a similarly high. So the question is, has that been looked at? And or maybe I think I could ask the bigger question: what has been the has the economic impact of these different options been considered? So one, for example, has a better economic development impact because it creates opportunity for groundwater recharge, which has an opportunity to have, you know, a variety of economic or social benefits. Just curious about that side of the equation.
We're really only looking at the economic in terms of, you know, what is the life cycle cost of the analysis. And like I said, that's really coming in the next phase. And then, you know, we will take an attempt to get into the rates, but it's fairly complicated because you've got so many different rates paid by each different agency. And I'm still getting my head around on how we might try to put something together on that's, you know, meaningful. You know, we clearly can define what the costs are, but how those translate back to rates. And a big part of this study in particular is that, you know, how much of the capital will be funded through, you know, maybe some grants that are available, or other funding sources that wouldn't necessarily directly result in rates to ratepayers. So there's a lot of things that kind of play into the true impact to the individual homeowner. But we will, and because it is so complicated, the goal is to kind of pick the preferred one based just on the capital life cycle cost and other factors. And then within that preferred option, try to present some sort of understanding of how that might result in a rate.
Thank you so much, Catherine. I appreciate that.
You're welcome.
We go next to Steve Trippy and then Sharon Piper.
You're muted, Steve.
You're muted.
I try not to do that.
We all do.
My two questions is what's the scoring criteria? And I was going to suggest you can't offhand the availability of public funding on this. You can't. A choice that has significant potential for public funding, as opposed to a choice where the funding is going to have to come from the homeowner, it's a no-brainer in which way you would want to go, in my mind. Doesn't matter the size, scope, whatever. So public funding has been an issue for us. And the other, so that's important to look at, is where public funding is going to be available and what the eventual rates are going to be. The other was Steve Coldis. At what point does the documents that we now have, and this is maybe not convenient, the preliminary report from Belgian Race and the CAG reply to that report, when does that become available? Because I think these folks need to see it before they go into their discussions here. Because
are you saying the final feasibility report?
I mean,
or the study area analysis that we just completed?
Study and area analysis and our response to it.
Right. So
I
think we're a month away from when we get a decision, and I know that we've gotten a decision from you, at least a month, right? But we have gotten a decision from you. We just need to figure out whether or not the Regional Water Quality Control Board is going to be on board with the approach that you've taken.
There's important thinking and 5 years of history in that document. So and our response to it. So I think it's important that this group sees it before it moves too far.
Well, I wonder, and I don't want to step on any toes for Sonoma Water staff, but since the next meeting of this group isn't until kind of mid-May, maybe we could get a targeted presentation just on the analysis. I don't know if that's possible or not. Paris too.
Yeah, I was gonna say that this the analysis that West Yost is doing is based on the amount of wastewater and the loads of the wastewater, BOD and TSS, and it's not looking at the other factors here. We are basically like looking at the technical viability of making sure that the smaller treatment plants can handle their flow. And then if we send it to the larger treatment plants, they are accepting that wastewater flow. The other aspects that Steve Trippi was talking about in terms of funding, it actually comes into that next report, which is going to be kind of provided by the stakeholder committee. Like, we need your input on that for moving forward with the projects that you would recognize as, okay, this project is going to create more burden on ratepayers compared to this other project. The West Yost analysis on the feasibility study is just solely based on the wastewater treatment capacity issues.
Thanks for that clarification, Paris too.
Yeah, I hope I answered that.
Well, maybe, to the question of the Monterio analysis, maybe it's possible to get at least an informational presentation on that in the future, so folks have an understanding of what's happening in the neighboring area. But we can follow up on that.
So the CAG meeting that both Steves are talking about, that's just for Monterio, and it's happening, I think, the third Thursday of each month, I believe, if I'm not mistaken. So when we put together, yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
It's an important one. I was going to make this comment. If you're trying to stay, quote, you got to include our friends from Villa Grande in your graphics, because Monterio, Villa Grande have been in this together the whole time.
Sure.
So get Villa Grande on your graphics. The other is we've been meeting monthly. Sorry, Dan, I'll just do this. For 5 years, since we were involved in the identification of the work plan for Belgian race, in the criteria from which Belgian race was selected, with them every step of the way along this, as well as the same time as providing support and getting information from the community members in these two communities. From the very beginning, this was intended as an effort to inform other communities. And from the very beginning, we were aware that we had very close neighbors that would probably either want to learn from or connect to something that we come up with, whether it's Villa Grande, whether it's people in Northwood and other communities along the way. So the information that's there, I think, will give you a good information of sort of well-informed public sentiment on different solutions. And that was the point, to sort of looking at what I don't know how much of the cat I can let out of the bag. I would just take a look in terms
Yeah,
of
of course.
that you're pursuing. For instance, and I think I can share this, there's a big preference at the end of our work that any solution that moved treatment out of the Russian River completely and into some reuse somewhere else or in ag was preferable to any reuse that involved treatment dispersal in the river. It's period. So, and I think I can say that because I just did. So that's sort of where we are. And that's why it's important to look at and note this is not just a Monterey Villa Grande study. That isn't what we looked at. That isn't what we were caring about. We cared about it because we share, and some of the members on the CAG are actually Forestville residents. And Guerneville Seward residents. So we care about this in the health of wastewater in our community as a sort of a model for other of the things other people should look at. And so the things we looked at that I think this group would be helpful for you to learn from. That's all.
Oh, yeah, of course. Like we actually looked at the draft that was prepared for the area for Monorio, and also this, this new study that's going to come out next month. As Steve said, yeah, we are going to provide that to Vestios to review.
Okay.
I mean, it's not going to be separate, but we can't make decision for Monorio. I just want to be
right.
Yeah.
Yeah, it sounds like you're kind of both talking about the same thing, whether or not it's going to be in the analysis, and the answer I'm hearing from Paris too is yes. So
I mean, Dan, do you want to weigh in quickly? Because then we can.
If I could, Sharon's been waiting very patiently for quite a while. I need to go to Sharon first, and then Dan, then over to Kyla. Sharon?
Yes, I was just wondering if you have any idea at this point of what the cost would be for a Forestville resident who is not non-sewer. I'm sure in the future the bill would be monthly, but just the initial setup, if there's any idea of what that would cost to be connected.
No, not at this point. I mean, it's a little further down the road. I think typically in a subject to sewer type scenario, there's, main infrastructure built, like the pipe going down your street. And then sometimes the homeowner is responsible for making that connection. And then there's a connection fee associated with that, as well as like the pipeline cost, that lateral. But sometimes that can also be covered through, grant funding. So it really kind of depends on how this project moves forward. There's so many factors to say how much it would boil down to one individual homeowner.
Thanks, Catherine.
I had one other just inquiry, and I know this is the other end of water. Is there anything in the plan for fresh water to go to Grayton?
That's not part of the study at all. The water treatment, like water supply and water treatment. This study is only focused on wastewater.
Okay.
Thank you. All right, let's go to Dan next, followed by Kyla and Brenda, and then we're going to pause. I have some discussion questions for you that you've already started answering. Dan, please.
Yeah, I wanted to follow on to Steve's discussion, which is that the one of the important documents is the CAG response to the Belgian race study, and it really, I think, is less of a technical thing than a sense of what at least this group of community members thinks is the most appropriate. And it feeds right into this broader discussion that we're having here. I think there was a strong preference for regionalization and taking advantage of recycling, and it's kind of scary to suggest that, because when you talk about, well, we're going to run a big pipe down a road all the way, up River Road, and it's going to pick up all this stuff. But stepping back from that, if you look at where the water is coming from and where it's going and what it's doing, then designing something that's more broad-based and takes advantage of the water that we're, quote, wasting, is really critical. And the focus that the CAG came down to was that the best thing we can do right now is plan for connecting to something, as opposed to connecting to this or to that. And we have had some pushback on that, but I think that I personally would like to see this project really come to a suggestion of how we can make use of our water, rather than concerning ourselves about, whether or not we're going to flood. That is, there is a whole separate issue around the collection system, as somebody mentioned. So I hope that could be taken into account in all of this, and also connecting our neighboring communities. So, and by the way, along the way, there hasn't been any discussion, to my knowledge, of what happens downstream from Villa Grande, because there are houses along the river there too, who may or may not need some kind of a connection to this. So, thank you.
Dan. We'll go to Kyla next, then Brenda. After that, we're going to pause discussion and move on to some targeted discussion questions. Kyla?
Thank you, and sorry about my being unmiked before. So Catherine, I am really impressed with how quickly this was all put together. It's quite impressive. And I do have a couple of questions. It's my understanding that if we go across regional areas, we may actually have to work with LAFCO, and I'm wondering if that's been considered, just because I think that that could be an issue. I'm really interested in recycled water. I hope that we can find a way to make that work. I'm also really interested and concerned about whether or not we're looking at one ESD per household, or with multi-units, whether there's multiple ESDs, because I'm very aware that the numbers, given how far along we've come and haven't done anything with this, are going to be beyond exponential. And most people think, well, landlords can just afford it. And the answer is can't raise rents. So that becomes, a really difficult question and issue. And I'm also very aware that, Nathan, you can correct me, at some point, there was an ability to request a connection if you were like one or two houses down from a project, and then hook into it. And that would also mean really looking at becoming even larger than we are looking at right now. But again, I want to thank you, Catherine, for doing such a great job.
Thank you. It's kind of a lot there. I think the one thing I will note that we are identifying, again, kind of that complexity of, implementation, and whether something like you'd have to go through LAFCO or you'd have to get approvals. So that'll be part of our selection process to consider that. But yeah, I think in general, and then kind of to the, how the rates would be divvied out to, an individual home versus like a multifamily, that is all way beyond the scope of what we're looking at. That's like several steps down the road. And I'm not sure if there was other,
I appreciate that, but I'm also aware that at this point, given that some of us have been working on this for over 20 years, that I have seen rates go higher and higher each time something is proposed. And we're now at a point where I can't even imagine people who are truly low income being able to handle this. And, you know, and I think that there's a cutoff with low income and people understand that and make accommodations, but there are other factors that I think are also important. And I'm really hoping that since you've been working so quickly, down the road, those can be considered. Thank you.
Thanks.
Linda.
Okay, I just thought I wanted to share with people that Russian River County Sanitation District ratepayers are currently paying over $2,000 a year. We have been getting the last 2 years 9% rate increases, and I expect that to continue. And one of the reasons is that that is a very expensive system to maintain because it is in a very fragile environment. The pipeline, main pipeline going under the river to the treatment plant is of concern because it is not earthquake proof, is my understanding. I'm sure there's other components there that need to be also made more stable in the event of an earthquake. There are, if people were to hook up, they would also have a hookup fee. They'd have to build their own lateral to the main pipeline. And if they live on a hill, that could be very expensive. There are all kinds of costs. And when you estimate, I think you're going to try and estimate costs, you think about all of those contingencies. Thank you.
Brenda, that really leads in, and I know, Tina, you have your hand up here. While we move through this discussion, I just wanted to throw a few questions up on the board for your consideration. We've actually already started filling in the blanks on some of these, but very curious to hear from all of you what questions you have about the qualitative criteria that Catherine presented, and you've already added a couple on there, I think, that I'm happy to run through. And then when we think about the alternatives, both the alternatives and the criteria, I'm curious what's missing, what you think really works with what you've seen, what gives you concern, and what might be missing. And the reason that's included twice, one in terms of the criteria and one in terms of the alternatives themselves. I apologize, some of those were supposed to be indented. Anyway, so I'll just put that up on the screen. I see a couple of hands up though. I want to go to Tina first.
First of all, I just want to really compliment that slide on the scoring criteria. I know there was a lot of analysis that you've distilled into that one slide, but I do have some questions regarding those qualitative criteria, and I think this is what this slide is getting at. I know you mentioned that they were scored on 1 to 5. And my overall question is, of the 4 alternatives that kind of passed the screening or that kind of landed on the top, how much variation did you see around each of those criteria and their scoring across the different criteria? So for example, like if we take one of the criteria, recycled water, where there's some in your top 4 that made the screening where it was like a 1, and some were like as a 5, where were you finding that they were mostly clumping around like 3, 4? I'm wondering about the spread and the scoring.
Yeah, generally there a lot of the criteria, the spread was like 1 to 5. I mean, again, we were ranking them against each other, so we were trying to create some spread in that regard. But for things like water recycling, and again, for that criteria, we were specifically asking the question, does this create recycled water opportunities in West County, right? So if we're exporting all the water to Windsor, while all that water would, a lot of that water, if not most of it, would be recycled into the geysers. That would not generate recycled water for West County. So it would have ranked fairly low. But again, that would be a criteria and maybe input from this group is maybe recycled water in West County is not important. Maybe just the fact that it's being recycled is important, which I guess I would say everything will have water recycling because they can't discharge to the river in the summertime. But yeah, so I think that, so bottom line is we were, we did try to rank them. Some criteria were a little bit narrow band. I'm trying to think of which ones off the top of my head, but I mean, the cost criteria were somewhat quantitative. And then similarly, environmental, we took like each factor, like each of the key factors, and then ranked each one of those and then took the average of the overall score. So those were not necessarily always 1 to 5. But we did try to apply, you know, some sort of metric behind each number when that was available.
Thank you.
Thanks, Dina. Alexis.
Yeah, I want to reiterate, great amount of work in a short amount of time. And I'm focusing in on the unsewered community part. And I see that in the criteria you have disadvantaged unsewered community. And then there's also, of course, just simply unsewered community, and that in the next steps after the financial analysis, there's the reconsidering of the unsewered question. And to me, that is an absolute must by and large, except where we're totally unreasonable to do, because any solution that cuts out people on septic or aughts or whatever we want to call it, or on cesspools and the rest of it, seems super short-sighted, because we are a community. And so we should be doing things that lift everyone up all at the same time, and in that way give back to the future, you know, like generations to come. And with that, I of course love the water recycling concept. I mean, that's just a no-brainer and should happen because we're going to need it. And I guess if there's a question in there, the question would be, what is the difference between the criteria version of unsewered community, which you've ranked, versus the second follow-up stage of assessment 2 steps from now?
Yep, thank you. So yeah, so the criteria is more like as an example, like if this alternative involves a pipeline that goes along an alignment that connects to specifically some of the regional board of the order called out specific disadvantaged unsewered communities that, like Hacienda, that needed to be looked at. So if there's a pipeline alignment that goes right through those communities, then that alternative is going to rank very high. Whereas an alternative that you'd have to build a bunch of infrastructure to get to that community might rank very low. In the analysis that we're going to do in the next stage, it's not going to limit to just those specific disadvantaged communities. We are going to look at every single unsewered parcel within the study area, and then we're going to develop communities that are, you know, ranked and identified based on factors like risk, proximity to the river, you know, size of the parcel, as well as like you know, like we have to look at factors like feasibility of like being able to like reasonably build a collection system around those communities, right? Like it, for example, wouldn't make a ton of sense to build a 2-mile pipeline to pick up 1 or 2 homes. That just would never be economically feasible. So we'll look at all those factors, and then the goal would be to then say, okay, if let's say this is our regional solution, and let's just, you know, whatever it is, right? This is our regional solution. This is the backbone of that infrastructure. What is it going to cost now to bring in these community clusters that we've identified to that system? And so we will then identify that, and then each one might be its own individual thing. It's kind of depending on how it plays out. But yeah, the goal would be to try to like differentiate between this is the regional project and then these are the added costs above that to bring in additional communities, if that makes sense. And we won't necessarily limit it just to the disadvantage. It's any parcel within the study area would be part of the consideration. We're not saying we're going to sewer every single parcel, but we'll consider every parcel in the assessment.
Great, thank you.
And Paris, I think you want to add something to that.
Yeah, again, I want to make some clarification about the scope of the ECA is that, so there are specific communities that are disadvantaged and are basically named in the ECA: Hacienda, Hollydale, Monterey, Villa Grande, Camp Miquel, and Gurneville. And as Catherine said, there are other unserved communities that we worked with the county and we got the information for those on-site treatment systems. But then I want to reiterate that, the project would evaluate the potential for regional projects. But then if there is any like specific studies for those other small communities, that would be beyond the scope of the project. Just want to make that clear.
Paris, too. All right, let's go ahead and go back to our questions. So I want to spend a few more minutes on thinking about both the criteria and the alternatives. Would love to get any feedback you have. While we're doing that, I will certainly encourage everybody to weigh in. Darren, please.
Yes. Is there a list of where these extra unsewered communities are? Me, for example, I'm in Forestville, in Forestville, but there's only just a small part of us in Forestville that are unsewered on our little street. And I was just wondering if that would be included in the project.
What we're intending to generate will be a map of the sort of communities or the parcels that are, identified as being, highly probable of easily being connected into this regional system. And that will actually be presented at one of the future stakeholder meetings. So I think, so that at least for the study, that is what we're generating. Will be a list of every single unsewered parcel in the county, but more map that shows, you imagine a colored map that shows, okay, here's a community cluster here, and here's one over here, where they are, and then sort of identifying those. And so for parcels, for example, that are in Forestville that are pretty close to an existing collection system, those are going to probably rank fairly high from the perspective of being potential future, part of a regional system versus a parcel that is not close at all to any of the existing infrastructure or any of the proposed infrastructure.
Okay, thank you.
Go next to Steve.
Yeah, just real quickly, and it occurred to me this is something that we haven't talked about a ton in our work, and I think it's missing. And that's intentional strategies around garnering public support for whatever the solution is and whatever the solutions are early on. And that's hard to do because the questions that we're going to ask earlier, how much is this going to cost me? So if you can't answer those questions, you can't build that. The other is this huge problem in dealing with and developing broad county political will. This kind of solution, countywide, has to be on the county's top 10 list when they go to Sacramento every year for how many years, Ann, they're gonna have to do this to even get a dribble coming out? James Gore is gonna have to be in this game. He's running to be up there with his hands on purse strings, and he cares about this. One of the few supervisors were able to get really engaged on it. The county has to be engaged on this isn't a technical problem. This is a political will problem. And it's ultimately a money problem. And we're not going to solve the money problem without the political will. And I would really suggest that a study to exist of, here's another study of how we could do better together without a way to say, how do we sell this? Who are our champions? Who do we get involved from the very beginning? Whose name's on this when it's published? I think is important.
Steve, I think once some of the cost analysis is complete, all of your statements are going to become that much more important. Catherine, I don't know if you had something you wanted to add.
No, that's good input.
Yeah, critically important for sure. Alexis?
So amen, Steve, what you said. And then also, I would love to hear from anyone on the call who's more on the technical side, who's like, say, on the water board or who's been in the sewage game, like dealing with this stuff, not on the community side, but operating sewage systems, in answer to what we've seen here, because your expertise is really valuable and might bring things to light that we who just flush the toilet don't know about.
Thanks, Alexis. Don't want to put anyone on the spot, but I know we're joined by a number of wastewater professionals and representatives from the water board. Your thoughts on the criteria, the alternatives?
Hello, this is Chad Davis, and if I could say a couple of words.
Please do.
Yeah, so this is a really exciting study for us, and as I mentioned, I'm currently managing both Forestville and Grayton, and you know, one of the biggest challenges that we have, and I'm not saying anything that isn't blatantly obvious here, but is that there's a lot of service needs, there's a lot of infrastructure improvement needs, there's a lot of regulatory needs, and we just, with these small, tiny communities that are being served, it's really challenging to get the resources necessary to do that in an equitable way. And so if what can come out of this is a broader base that can not only better serve existing customers, but also sort of connect the lines where there are areas maybe like Camp Meeker or places that are unserved currently, by looking at some sub-regional solutions, I think that is a huge potential step in addressing some of the historical issues that we have that are just going to be getting worse. The recycled water portion of the discussion as well is that the more wastewater that can be collected into our communities and beneficially reused has a direct benefit on water sustainability for the region. And we're seeing with this crazy weather and periods of drought that we really need to look at finding alternative sources of water, for at least for non-potable uses, in the form of recycled water. And so when it comes, a gentleman, and I'm driving, I apologize, but a gentleman had mentioned that it certainly is a political discussion as well, which I agree. And but I think that the idea of sub-regionalization makes that political piece more manageable too, because we can look at what the benefit of this would be to the direct communities that we're serving, and outreach to them, and market the concept to them, and hopefully, in the long term, if this is something that makes sense, which I think it does, then that accomplishes what the regional boards concerns are with failing septic systems and TMDL issues. And so I think that this is really a huge step in getting us the information we need to know how to best move forward on a sub-regional basis.
Chad? Any other thoughts? to Alexis's comment, would love to hear from those of you that work directly in the wastewater space. Oh, okay. Right. Any questions about the alternatives themselves? We've talked quite a bit about some of the criteria, and clearly there's a huge interest in costs and future impacts to ratepayers. Looking at the alternatives themselves, the next thing we're going to do is actually launch a poll to get your initial reaction to the top 4 that are selected here, which are displayed up on the screen. But any questions you have for Peristu and Catherine about the alternatives themselves? Do they make sense? Do they give you any major heartburn? Again, this is just the first discussion. There will be more, but. And go ahead and just jump right in.
I just want to echo what Steve said in terms of needing to make sure that the community understands what we're doing and is accepting of it. There has been a fairly significant groundswell against sewering with people, and also given the regulations with the county and the Water Quality Control Board. There have been a lot of people that have been required to upgrade their septics to pretty expensive systems. And I think that there will be a lot of pushback on that when they're now being asked to upgrade to a sewer system as well. So I see that one of the things that really would be important in this whole process would be figuring out, as Steve Trippy mentioned, how is this talked about, but also how do we get people on board to understanding this enough to really make it work? Again, I think it would be really helpful to consider working with the county on not requiring major septic upgrades if in fact this is going to be coming on board in the next 1 to 4 or 5 years, and coming up with a less expensive solution. So that's my thought on that.
Thanks, Kyla. Brenda, you have a hand up as well?
Yeah, I just want to say that my experience with these presentations are, they tend to focus on the feel-good aspects of doing a particular project. And there's nothing wrong with that if and only if there's a balance with telling the public what the downside would be and having a really fair and equal presentation that says, well, here's the good part and here's the part that could be a problem. And there are a lot of problems with Russian River County Sanitation District, and I haven't heard anyone really responsive to any great extent to anything I've mentioned. And I just am very concerned that the picture that will be provided to the public is a feel-good picture that says everything will be okay and fine if we do this or we do that. All of the positive ideas are good. I don't want to downplay that. But I also want to know that the problems we've had, which cost enormous amounts of money to fix, and right now the money isn't available, get considered, and that the public be told the whole truth and not just part of the truth. And that's what I want to say right now. Thank you for the opportunity to express myself.
Of course, appreciate it. Thank you for the comments. Hand up from Alexis. Go ahead, Alexis.
Hi. If we do this poll, I would feel strange in that I don't know that I would know even what to vote for, because without seeing which criteria scored how. I don't know. Like, all I'm bringing to this are my values, right? I'm not a sewage expert. And because we don't have pricing, we can't figure that into it. And so looking at the list of 4, I'm like, you could convince me any of the 4 are the best by knowing what are the different high and low points of each one. But because, and this is, I like that there is the graph summarizing the outcome, but it would have been extremely helpful to see, and I don't know how you do it graphically, but how they scored on each criteria, because then I would know for me as the voter in the poll, which aspects are most important to me, and that would be the one of the 4 I would vote for, if you get my drift. So I feel a bit stymied in knowing, like, how would I know which of the 4 is the best?
Yeah.
Hmm.
Staff, that's kind of an interesting point. I know so much of this is going to come down to some of the community factors, chief among them, for many at least, is going to be cost. I believe as we kind of talked about the idea of a poll, the concept or the idea was just to get sort of initial reactions only. We know that a lot more data is going to be needed, a lot more information. But I just want to make sure that I have that correct. The purpose of the poll is really to get an initial gut reaction of which of these alternatives sort of resonates with everybody the most. Is that accurate? I guess, and I asked that question of staff just because I know there's still an awful lot of unanswered questions. And maybe if I put the poll up, you're welcome to take a look at it. You'll see that there's basically one question at the top. Again, your kind of gut reaction to which poll kind of resonates with you the most. And then we also, of course, welcome any additional feedback. And if you really don't feel comfortable answering it right now, I understand, but we did want to give people that opportunity. So I'll just leave this open. It should pop up on your screen. If you're comfortable answering it, we'd love to get your input. Otherwise, certainly happy to keep taking questions and comments as well with the 20 minutes or so that we have remaining. I'll go to Tina and then over to Steve. Tina?
I think I would also kind of echo the previous comment about interest in seeing how these alternatives scored relative to each other on each of those qualitative criteria. That would inform, my selection of this alternative that resonates with me. For example, on the reliability criteria, is it a long-term sustainable solution to meet effluent limits? If there is a alternative that is scoring low on that criteria relative to the others, that would really affect how I view such an alternative.
Gotcha. Thanks, Tina. I guess because it's come up a couple of times, Catherine, is the scoring, the actual kind of weighting and everything, is that something that's in a graphic that can be readily displayed? I know it's a huge amount, but
That's what I'm trying to figure out here.
okay.
Give me 1 minute here.
All right. As you're looking for that, let's go ahead and keep taking some comments. We'll go to Steve and then Matt. Steve?
Yeah, I just want to be sure I'm clear here. So in this scenario, it's sort of like this, the question is, in the best of all worlds, when you flush, where do you want it to go? What would be the best for our community to do that in the reaches from Santa Rosa down the Russian River watershed, terminating in Villa Grande? That's the scope of this question.
Yeah. In a nutshell, that's correct.
And within the options, you've got 2 facilities that don't exist. 1A.1 and 1A.2, which is 1C. So neither of those facilities exist, right?
Yes, that's correct. So these are the different alternatives that have been considered, and the sort of four that have raised to the top are 2 separate regional facilities, 1 regional, export all to Windsor, export all to Santa Rosa.
And then you've got these 2C, 3A, 3B ones, which tells me you want to use both Windsor combinations of Windsor and Santa Rosa, Windsor and Russian River, and Windsor and Forestville, Grayton, depending on what side of the river you're on.
Yeah, so it's the question was really just intended to get your reaction to the all of the alternatives that Catherine presented earlier. So 1A, local facilities, or what's labeled here as regional facilities. 1B,
So I think, yeah, I guess I would say that, yeah, I mean, we shortlisted 1A, 1B, 2A, and 2B.
No,
I'm sorry, 1A, 1C, 2A, and 2B. So this shows all 8 of the scenarios that were looked at, but we did already screen that down to those 4. And I do have a table that shows the ranking. I found it. It's a little complex, but I think I can step through and show folks if those would find that helpful, what we have.
please, yeah, you're welcome to. You should be able to.
Okay. So, kind of, I'll step through this as efficiently as I can. So reliability and ease of operation. Again, so 1A is, the split treatment local. 1B is all treatment at the at the Russian River. 1C is all at Forestville. 2A is all to Windsor. 2B is all to Santa Rosa. And then 2C is combined with Russian River going to with Russian River local treatment and Grayton Forestville going to Santa Rosa. 3A is, I'm sorry, I said that backwards. 2A is all to Windsor. 2B is all to Santa Rosa. 2C is splitting that. So half of it going one direction, half of it going the other. 3A is half of the flow staying at Russian River and half of it going to the Santa Rosa plant, and 3B is flow staying at the local and some of it going out. So for reliability and ease of operation, scenarios 2A, 2B, 2C, which all involve sending flow to larger regional facilities, will offer greater reliability and ease of operation for West County, right? You're getting all the wastewater treatment out of West County. That's easier to implement. So those ranked very high. 2C was slightly derated because you'd have 2 separate systems, one going one direction, one going the other. So you've got 2 separate systems that have to be managed. The remaining alternatives were scored lower depending on how many smaller facilities would be operated. So 1A ranked very low because you have 2 separate regional facilities. So from an ease of operation and managing, that becomes more complex. And then the hybrid options were derated from the local facility scenarios because they also involve operating, an export pipeline. So flexibility for adding critical and sewer communities. So again, these export options ranked fairly high because they have a pipeline that's along the Russian River. And then scenarios that could be modestly altered to include a pipeline alignment ranked fairly high. And then scenario like 1A ranked fairly low because you really just have these 2 localish facilities and not that big long distribution line. I'm starting to see some questions, but should I pause for a moment?
Certainly, and I do know, Catherine, I sent you a chat. I know this is a ton of information to try to walk through in just a few minutes. So just let me know your thoughts there. Let me go to,
Yeah, I mean, one
uh,
option is we could share this. I don't know if we're comfortable with that or not, but I mean, this is, I mean, you can see I've got each criteria. I mean, we could just look at the numbers, but I think probably going through the description of the ranking is probably almost too much information.
certainly, yeah, at least during Zoom,
Yeah.
a short Zoom call.
And who did the ranking? Was this a subjective analysis by Yoast?
Yes.
Okay.
So I think that was the intent for this meeting to kind of share that with the stakeholder committees and just see, like, we came up with this top 4 alternatives here. What are your thoughts? What would be your top 4 alternatives? I think however you want to rank them, are you going to come up with the same top 4 alternatives, or are you going to have a different top 4 alternatives? I think that's what's going to come out of this poll.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. We're not trying to select the number 1 alternative. We're trying to say, do we have the right top 4?
Yeah, exactly. We have several hands.
Yes. So we need to figure out the best way to share this with folks, and clearly there's a lot of interest in seeing more of the details, kind of looking under the hood a little bit. So if we can discuss that and just commit to getting back to the stakeholder committee how we're going to share this information, that would be wonderful. Let me go to Matt, followed by Kyla and Brenda. Matt. Matt McDermott. You may be muted.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, I was trying to unmute myself. I couldn't figure it out. So the question I had was any information gathered on the feasibility of putting a pipeline of recycled water down to the quarries in Forestville? Because I feel like that is a major concern with Forestville taking on water from other districts. If we can clean that water and get it out to the quarries, that's huge. And if we can do that, then I would say, we want to take on as much water as possible to clean. But if we can't do that, and the option is for other districts to pump or send their wastewater to Forestville, then that's a concern for us. So I was just wondering if anything has come to light regarding that.
Yeah, so far we've looked at the water data for the one quarry that Forestville sends potable water to get a sense of those demands. And then and that has played into the analysis of, availability of recycled water options in that area, and which results in, an option where water is coming towards Forestville to rank really high because there's a lot of recycled water demand in that area. But the stage where we actually look at demands, like once we pick a preferred option and we look at demands, we will be like digging into that a little bit more and potentially reaching out to those quarries and talking to them about, specifically what a recycled water project might look like at their facility.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
To Brenda and then Steve.
Oh, I thought I was next. Kyla?
Oh, sorry, Kyla. Your hand went down. So
I don't take offense.
No.
So I am aware that I don't know enough about the other places that we are discussing to really make an informed decision. For example, I don't know whether or not the Santa Rosa plant that is being discussed can actually be sent to the geysers. I don't know anything at all about the Grayton quarry situation. So I feel like trying to make a decision without having better information is really difficult. If, you know, if it's a scale of 1 to 10 and you have picked the top one, that would be probably my choice because I feel like you are much more informed than I am. But I don't think that that is a rational way to make a decision.
Nico, appreciate that. And that's clearly, that's kind of what I'm hearing that's resonating with a lot of other folks, that just more information is needed. So we'll need to put our heads together and consider the best way to get you the information you need to make a decision.
Thank you. I mean, I'm happy to do this in between meetings. I'm happy to do it sooner rather than later. I just need to understand better what the choices are and mean in order to vote, because I think that this is such an important decision for so many communities. I don't want to be in a position to make an uninformed decision.
I appreciate that so much. So let's see, we have Brenda and then Steve.
Okay, first of all, I want to know if you're keeping track of all these comments and will we be able to have access to them?
Yes, most definitely. I'm taking notes. We have a recording of the session. We'll develop a summary and the recording will be made available.
Thank you. Okay, I also want to call attention to the fact that the Russian River County Sanitation District is right in the floodplain, and it makes it subject to all kinds of problems that other systems don't have for the most part, or at least not to the extent we do. I think that needs to be carefully studied if you're going to make it a high priority. In terms of summer, all of the systems suffer from drought. I have spent a lot of time studying Santa Rosa's system, and in the summertime, their storage goes down about 80 to 85%, and they don't have the water. They have just enough to send to the geysers, and they have to cut off their farmers who use the water in the Laguna area. So that people keep talking about the wonderful reuse, which is great when we have the water, but during drought, we don't. And those are just two things that I think need to have careful consideration, along with the other comments I've made.
Thanks, Brenda. One of the, I believe, not the next meeting, but the meeting after that is going to be focused entirely on recycled water discussion. So we'll certainly get into more detail at that time. Let's go to Steve next. Steve.
Yeah, just comment on the report you quickly appropriately abandoned trying to explain. And if it comes back around to us, how it might be a little bit more palatable. One, I would agree with Kyla that if work's been done to thin it down to, you know, from these bazillions of things that we looked at, some of which are frankly silly, who cares what goes north of the river and south of the river? But here's sort of the top 5 options. Let's talk about those. That would make sense to me. The other would be when they're presented, don't mix your scale with your identifiers. 1A got a 2. That's too hard. 1A is, I think I know what 1A is. I think 1A is a combined Russian River, Monterey Villa Grande plant. Name it that at the top of the column. MRVG, RRS, you know, whatever the code is, so you can decode it by looking up and down. And the other would be to remind us what the scale is on the chart. I spent a lot of time trying to figure out on a scale of 1 to 5, okay, 1's high or low. I didn't know initially. So that was tough to tell. So that would be sort of my comment on it. And then the other is, if you're to do this again in a rubricing format, and I've done a lot of this, I would suggest not going with odd numbers in your rating scores, because it encourages 3s. And what a 4-point scale would give you is some leaning, a direction, like what's to the left of center and what's to the right of center in terms of what people's opinions are. My suggestions.
Steve, much appreciated. All right. So I am hearing loud and clear from folks that the poll may not be 100% useful at this time, and that we have a little bit more work to do in terms of getting the information out, and to Steve's point, displaying it in such a way that it kind of resonates with folks and a bit easier to digest. So I know we have about 5 minutes left here. I'm going to go ahead and end the poll for now. And clearly, we need to do a little work to get that information out to you, and hopefully we can have sort of a revised exercise at your next meeting to get your feedback on the individual alternatives themselves. So let me, with the time remaining, I certainly welcome any additional questions that folks might have. While you're gathering any final thoughts, I just wanted to run through a couple of assignments that I tracked down. Let's see, there was a specific request to post the presentation to the website. We will do that along with the summary, just as we did for meeting number 1. The other thing that'll be posted, and I just mentioned it, is a recording of this session so that you can actually find, if the summary is not enough detail for you, you can go directly back to the recording of the discussion. As I mentioned, staff will kind of huddle to develop a graphic or discuss the best way to share the actual scoring that was done for each one of the alternatives. So we'll think through the best way to get that information to you. Let's see. Flipping through a few other notes here. There was a request early on in the discussion to see whether or not, let's see, whether or not the Monterey analysis and the CAG response could be presented or at least shared with this group. We'll discuss that and get back to the committee as well. And that's kind of the extent of the assignments that I captured. Andrea and other staff members, were there other action items that you identified?
Nope, you
No,
got
but I
them.
did
Thank
want
you,
to
Sam.
notice, yeah, that the presentation's on the website, and we'll always try to post those prior to the meeting so the public will have access to them if it's available. So it's already up there. And I put the link in here, but yeah, it's there.
Excellent. Thanks so much for doing that. All right. So just I'll hand it back over to Carlos for some closing thoughts in just a moment. A quick reminder that the next committee meeting is scheduled for May 14th at 4 p.m. That link is available. That link is available on the study website already. And we'll certainly be circulating that around directly to the committee members as well. But if you're joining as a member of the public, you're encouraged and welcome to visit the Sonoma Water West County website, and you can find more information on both the study and future meetings there. So I know we just have a minute or two left. Carlos, any closing thoughts before we wrap up?
No closing thoughts. I think it's been a great conversation. Really appreciate all the input from the stakeholder committee. Clearly, there's some missing information, particularly on costs. I heard, and also kind of capacity at some of these other treatment plants. It's clear we'll have to make some assumptions regarding those, and we'll work on that and come back to the committee so that folks can make more informed decisions in their voting. So we look forward to developing that information and coming back to the committee so we can move forward. Really appreciate everybody's time and input.
Thanks so much, Carlos. Thank you all for attending. We'll be in touch very soon. I hope you enjoy the rest of your evenings, but we'll go ahead and adjourn the meeting for now. Take care.
Thank you. Have a good night.
Thanks,
Thank
everybody.
you.
Thank you.